gonna, we ask for him and or a representative.
Hey, Nick. Hey, Nick.
How are you doing?
You over at Poison Ivy?
Pretty close.
Pretty close.
Oh, don't get us started.
I know.
You wanna see the stars?
No.
Just a couple.
Yeah.
As long as it stayed on your arm, we're
Good,
good.
how are you doing?
All right, we will call this special session to order to discuss industrial park road construction and stormwater funding. I have a email from Darren here discussing some of the action items for the industrial park road. I've read through it. The plan looks pretty good. Excuse me, the stormwater. The plan looks pretty good for stormwater, but let's do the industrial park first.
To the industrial park. President Fisher, members of the board, what we've got is just a couple days ago, I'll go back in a little further, and we've got Lisa here and Corey that can help give us some of the details. When I first began employed here, Lisa and I had a discussion that we were going to be leaving the DPW, had some obligations that had been made by my predecessor, but they were verbal. And so since that time, I've gone back and done as much work and studying and looking as I can to find out if there's something. And she gave me a email just 2 days ago. And with that was the Klinger and Associates engineer's estimate of cost. Okay, you've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
There's two parts of it. One is for design for $20,779.20. And then for the project management of $34,220.30. For a total of $54,999.50. And with that, I said, this is not a very good idea to just simply write this check. I probably ought to get some approval for this and some direction on how we want to go forward. And so there's a couple of things that, again, I would like to, if they're in writing or somewhere, we have made an obligation to do a match. I believe it's a 20% match for the governor's cost share. And so that's one of the items. Our question has been, thank you, sorry. So our question is, would this $55,000 be part of that cost share? Or is that another cost that's coming at a later date? Is this something above and beyond? Is that $50,000 we paid for that road, the Bross property, is that a part of that? Would that also be part of that matching? Don't know, but we do have budgeted the $200,000 for that matching. So we do know that we were going to be paying that. We don't have it for the engineering, and I think we did have it for the road purchase. But other than that, so that is my question for you of the board. Any clarification that you'd like to have from either Corey or Lisa? They're here to answer those questions, and then I'd like to have that direction going forward, what we want to do and how we want to do it.
Sure. Corey, you want to go first?
Yeah, you can give the history to the industrial.
Yeah, so Stefan's here, obviously, and so is Matt. So just to give you some history on the conversation, where it started in 19 was Jared and Matt had reached out with a desire to talk with the Ross family about some easements that you all needed for sewer. We also, during those conversations, talked about how the access right now to the substation is not exactly permanent. I don't know the structure of that, but they had mentioned that they needed to deal with that as well. And so we came across the opportunity for the governor's cost share grant, so we approached the board. I believe Lenny and Stefan and a few others were on the board at the time, knowing that they probably didn't intend to build that road, that next year or whatever the case might be. However, knowing that we could get an 80% discount on the road that they needed to build at some point anyway, which would be helpful to us, obviously, with marketing of the park to have another road in there. So at the time, the board agreed to pursue that and move forward with that. I don't remember that we talked about engineering necessarily. I believe Mark's estimate had something in there for the cost of their acquisition of the right-of-way. But I don't remember that to be.
My understanding is right-of-way acquisition had to be separate of the project.
Okay.
The project would not include.
Okay, so sorry about that. So, sorry.
I was
So,
going to say, the grant does not include the engineering. So that's not covered under it, so it won't be part of the match, unless you remember differently.
I don't think so. So that was the original conversation, I think, with the board at the time was, we had this opportunity to get basically a 20% or 80% discount on the cost of the road to build that road, and they were willing to move that forward. That's where the $200,000, I believe, came from that you talked about, Darren, in the budget. So unless I misstated anything, Stefan was here, and so was
Yeah, I don't think you did, yeah.
Okay.
I do recall that portion of it. I don't recall the engineering portion, but after talking with Darren,
And it,
you're not gonna be able to do this without an engineering study, so.
and history-wise, just so you know, the governor's cost share, as you recall, you probably saw in our reports, was pulled back during COVID. The governor was pulling back those types of programs because we didn't know at the time what COVID was going to be, and they were pulling back some funding. Then they reinstated that funding, and so that's what led this conversation to move forward again, because they reissued it. They issued it to us, they took it back, they issued it again. And so that's why it's taken basically 2 years to get to this point. There was kind of a back and forth there a little bit, so.
It hadn't been said, but is the project supervision naturally a part of the project? The $30,000 piece?
It's part of the project. I wrote the grant on it, so, for you guys. So it's part of the project because you have to have that construction management piece of it in order to make sure everything's constructed properly. Yeah. It's, where they're ensuring that it's to spec and all of that. And so the engineering and the construction management piece are part of the project, just like the land acquisition is part of the project. They're simply not covered by the grant.
So the project management would not be covered by the grant?
I don't believe the project management is covered by the grant.
Okay.
Who does the design?
Klinger. Yeah, that's who the engineering,
To what standard?
to, I guess, the standard of what a road would be for the city.
I believe MoDOT was involved in that too.
Yeah.
They are involved in it?
Yes, the governor's cost share program runs through MoDOT, so they've been involved in the conversations with MoDOT.
So we have to meet MoDOT standards.
I don't know that, I just know they've been involved in the conversation with Klinger.
The reason I ask is, for access for our substation, we can have a gravel road.
Correct.
But
we don't want to put in a 10-inch pavement like it's an interstate highway either. And I know MoDOT, they love to do that kind of stuff. But so you start driving costs is what my concern is.
well, I do know that at the time that Corey had brought the grant forward, you all had before you constructing a road, getting a grant, and then receiving $800,000. So that's not going to be a gravel road.
And I'm not a part of this, but I was here when those discussions were held, and I can say that my recollection of what your predecessor had presented to the board was that we needed access, and also because the business park was basically the Board of Public Works project, it was something that was going to be necessary in order to move that forward and get something done there. The idea with the project being that we want to sell electric and other utilities to the people in that facility, and we're not getting a lot of people wanting to move in there, and that perhaps one of the things that was holding that back was the lack of a road. And so, as I recall, what the discussion was at the time, and Bill, correct me if you think I'm wrong, was that you guys were going to go ahead and build a city street so that it would open it up that on that end, and perhaps start getting some people to start purchasing some lots in the business park and move it forward. So,
Do you recall, I asked this question earlier, Lisa coming in, she had some information. When the business park was purchased, where did those funds come from?
Board of Public Works.
So it really alludes to ownership and responsibility.
To a certain extent, and the way they did it predates my tenure as city attorney. But the way they did it, it's vested in the city, as I think probably would have to be. But all the funds came from the Board of Public Works. The Board of Public Works would like to recoup those funds. My understanding of what was going on was the Board of Public Works would like to recoup those funds, and the best way to do that, also the best way to find some new people to sell utilities to, would be to develop this as a business park. Because prior to that, for at least 5-6 years of my tenure as city attorney, what they were doing was renting it to a farmer, and there'd be some reports of, well, we got our couple of $100 in rent and blah, 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 and so we still need to figure something to do with this ground.
So legally, the the sale or ownership of parcels, specifically the revenue from those parcels would go to where?
Goes to the board to recoup the funds that were expended to purchase the ground originally. The deeds would have to be signed by the city, but the concept was that the board was entitled to those funds.
When was all that done?
Predates me,
So is there
so
time-
prior to '03.
So is there documentation out there?
I don't know.
That?
I don't know.
Lisa, do you agree with that?
I mean, yeah, I did not know the answer to that question. When Bill asked me where the funds came from, I'm like, I don't know, you know, where they came from. I was in the parking lot, so I couldn't research it. But,
Okay,
Add something to that.
Sure.
I know this discussion took place back around the time we were discussing the road as to who owned the park, et cetera. And Abe at the time had run a spreadsheet about dollars that were spent both by the city and BPW on that. And then I know they sold some dirt to
I was gonna
ODOT.
say, didn't the city sell their soul for some dirt?
They sold some dirt.
I mean, don't they,
There's a spreadsheet
back me
somewhere.
up here, cause doesn't the city only have like 10% ownership or something?
The city owns the entire tract of ground because the board can't own real estate on its own. Where the money came from was primarily the board.
Right, I do remember that, and then there was a bunch of dirt sold.
Correct.
And the city got all the money, which
Correct.
gave up their entitlement to the land.
That's, well, their entitlement to proceeds if we ever figured something to do with
And
it.
I'm not
And I-
being
and I'll get you,
literal here, I'm being, you know.
I understand, but yes,
figurative of
yes,
what I can remember from
Let
a little
me,
ways back when we were talking about the beautiful pond that was gonna be outside the office.
right.
So I'm just trying to kind of remember
I have-
what I had learned a few years ago, but I thought there was, like, the city had sold a bunch of dirt for the bridge. Was it
Yes,
for the new bridge?
the approach.
And that in doing that, they had got all the proceeds, and so therefore, any financial proceeds from the park would go to the board and not the city.
Correct. That's how it was explained to me. But again, all those dealings predated my tenure as city attorney. So I'm just going off of what I heard sitting in meetings when this was, because Bob Stevenson was the one that originally proposed the business park. And I did not research any of the things he claimed. I just went off of what I was told. But nobody said, no, that's wrong. That's not what happened. So I presume he was correct. And I believe you're accurate in regards to how that all, I was told, all went down.
and
I that's kind of what I remember, because I kind of got in a little bit of research on that
you've got
Right.
a very good
during
memory.
during the water
And let me
during
hand
the
this to
water debacle, and I just remember there was going to be a nice office with a pond with some ducks.
There you
Right.
go. I did find a document discussing that as I went through the documents, all of this. And this is from Kimberly Hansen, Finance Director, 2011. And it talks about that the board did pay the 1.2 million. It also says that the board received a check for 550,000 for the, if that was the same, for the Missouri Department of Transportation for the field. So,
Yeah, and that, sorry, Karen, but that spreadsheet that I mentioned that Abe did a couple of years ago had.
covers that as well.
And some revenues on it that he
Okay.
had done some research. I'm not sure who got involved in that.
So
And-
the board received the money for the fill, not the city.
correct.
I
2011.
thought
That's
the
what
city
they
got
said.
some of the money too, though. Is that wrong?
All I got was that.
According to this little memo here, it is.
Oh, I'm not doubting you.
That's all I got.
I vaguely remember, Ms. Hanson.
And that also says that the city did contribute $150,000 to the purchase. And so if the city did not receive the fill money and the board did,
I
then
want the 150,000.
Oh, I see.
And then I have another memo that's from Mr. Stevenson. That says it was a 85% split, that the BPW owns 85% and the city owns 15%.
And this is October the 27th, 2014. What was that one dated?
11.
11.
It's October, yeah,
2011?
2011. The original purchase, according to this, was 1996, so,
Oh, my goodness.
I think.
It's been a while.
I was out of law school, but just barely.
But again, and so going forward, if there is sales of property, that 85-15, I would assume that would be the split of those profits, correct? I mean,
Unless we can find something different.
right, and so I
No, that's definitely what I read.
would love to have that, again, kind of in writing, so we know what we're doing going forward. Back to the question of the engineering, whether we approve that or not. Are we building a road to our substation? We can do that. What's the
I don't,
direction of
I
the
don't
board?
have a problem, doing the engineering, but I certainly have questions about what standard they're going to use. And I would assume Matt or someone will be advocating for our position on that so that we're not building, something, overbuilding something.
My understanding is it's gonna be the same as what the road is in front of Sleep Inn. You're gonna be allowed to extend the same concrete.
Is that asphalt or concrete?
Concrete.
It's concrete. Okay, so they're probably in the 8 to 10 inch. Because you're gonna run truck traffic back there. No curb and gutter or that sort of thing.
It would be curb and gutter.
Curb and gutter. So it's really a subdivision
It would
resident.
be a concrete sidewalk as well, according to what Mark Ross put in his proposal.
Well, and I do know that the project itself is over $1 million and the grant is over 800,000 and then plus the 200,000 gets you up to that 1.1 million, excluding the engineering and the purchase price, which were not figured into the grant. So,
I don't have a good picture of how this thing is going to go. We're talking about having the main egress into the whole park somewhere around the
It's one of three.
Between
Oh, okay.
Abel's and the Sleep Inn.
sleep in.
So it's basically an extension of the Sleep Inn Road, which is Lakeside Drive, directly south to the substation.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only one of three entrances currently to the park. You have a
currently
currently
designed.
designed for it.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back and look at that original engineering that was done by Klingner for the board years ago, I don't even know when that was done, that showed the park and the lake and some of the other things on that road that we're proposing to build is on that. It's been planned from the very beginning.
Yeah, you'll have one entrance off the north to the outer road. You'll have one entrance off the roundabout from the northwest corner of the park, and then one entrance across from Spartan's entrance there off Highway MM.
Mm-hmm.
And did we have to, or do we have to purchase some land from somebody? Wasn't there an issue with Ross? Okay.
That's,
I'm trying to play catch up here with my memory. So has that been done?
In
That
process.
we have purchased the property?
It's approved. right?
It's approved. We're waiting on title work and closing date to be set.
Okay, and the board is set to pay for that?
That is correct.
Mhm.
and it has been budgeted. That was the point
Okay.
that Darren made.
Is that correct, Paul?
Purchase of
The Bros, the 50,000?
was it budgeted?
Mm-hmm.
It was in their capital improvement plan.
So it was.
Yeah, I believe it was too.
Okay.
Matt, is there any reason to think that this engineering study and oversight of the project is out of line? It doesn't seem like it to me, but
It doesn't seem out of line. My recollection was that it was included, the engineering was included in the grant, but I looked a little bit yesterday morning when I had time and was unable to find any documentation stating that.
okay. Any other questions?
So I'm sorry. My job has got me crazy. I'm trying to get out there and get here. So the total amount that the project will be 1 point something.
1 point something.
The
and
grant-
It's 800,000 something. I could probably pull it up in my
I think it's
email.
835.
It's 835.
I was gonna say 865, 835, something like that.
So with the engineering and the property purchase, it's gonna be a $1.2 million project.
Okay. and then the grant is a little over 8, you think? And so the remaining balance will be covered by the board, which is a total of 200, has anybody got a number? 200 something?
It'd be 300 and something,
300 something,
10,000 or something like that.
okay,
For a $1.2 million
sure.
asset.
What we originally discussed with the board at the time on the match was using the funds that the board already budgets for the park each year, as opposed to trimming trees or whatever else gets done, using that towards the match of the road and the grant. And I think we talked about that would fall over 2 years originally or something like
Yeah,
that.
it'd be over 2 budget years.
The desire was to try to use the funds that have been budgeted for the park to match the road, to match the grant.
Yeah, there, I don't know, do you know what that amount is? What is budgeted each year?
150.
One, there you go.
We were just trying to help.
Do we have any other discussion on this?
So does this road just go to the power station?
Yes.
Is it a good spur to go back into the usable park?
Yeah, so
I can go get a drawing that shows it.
what we
if
tried
that
to
help.
talk about was stopping it on both sides of the substation so we don't build something that would impede development, since we didn't know at the time what might develop there. So right now, what we planned was to come down to the substation, head to the west on the north side of the substation, and then head all the way south on the east side, I guess, of the substation. So that way it stops and caps at the substation, so depending on how the land's sold and what needs to be developed in the future for roads, it can be done. And the drawing that was done years ago, I don't know when that was done, shows it a little bit differently.
But it also shows the big, huge duck pond.
It does, yeah, it also shows the pond.
Duck
The
pond.
desire was to try to stop it at the substation, so we don't build a piece of road that then has to be torn out in the future.
Yeah, makes sense.
This is a rendering of what it originally first proposed. The only thing different in the final was the size of this lake, but this would be the road right here. It was planned to connect to the road that come off MM and also the road that comes off
And
of.
where's the substation in that picture?
Right here.
Oh, okay.
Sleep in would be right here in this corner.
Okay, so it doesn't continue on into the park,
Right now it dead ends right there, just past the sleep in.
but the
property.
proposed road stops at the
We're
substation.
proposing to do a section of property, or a section of road on the remaining Bross property and then split it here at the substation so that it could go around. You could have a usable lot here, plus continue on.
Okay.
So we're looking at 300 feet or 500 feet of roadway?
It's more than that, isn't it?
I don't remember.
Okay.
800 feet, it comes to mind, I think. Time you got past the substation.
So just looking at that, without trying to redesign it, which is kind of my default, but we are getting to the substation, but then we're going to put 2 other legs on that? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, it
So you have 3 legs of
No.
concrete?
Down to-
it would go down here,
Yeah,
go past the substation, and then there would also be a spur that would come off to the
okay.
north of the
With
substation.
with the future then being where it looks like a dam would be? Or
Yeah.
something, yeah, okay.
So
Yeah, I drove out there and looked at it back when we were having these discussions, and I agree, it's at least 800 feet.
I wonder what Mark Frost used in his estimate. He had
I mean, they
he had a
did,
number.
they did the survey on the Bross property, and they know what, they were part of the original, cost estimate when the grant application was submitted.
Do you have any concerns that we should know about?
My only question comes down to what fund should the engineering and construction oversight come out of? And if it does come out of the fund you recommend, are we bumping up against the Hancock Amendment?
No, well, let me answer first. I'm answering the second question, and without answering the first question. The answer to the first question is, it appears to me it should come from an electric fund. Obviously, staff may disagree with me, but that'd be my thought because it's to provide you a road to your electrical substation. And I don't believe that there would be any violation. In no circumstance can I think of that it would be a Hancock violation. The concern would be, would it be against the prohibition of mixing funds or spending the money on the wrong thing? The idea that you're getting customer money and it therefore needs to be expended upon those things. It's to build the road out to the substation. I believe it's an appropriate expenditure for the electric fund to spend.
Thank you. That's the only opinion I was really interested in.
I'll take your direction.
So-
How we book it, and there's been some questions
I do have
on,
one question. This is directed toward Lisa. Is the council going to sign the contract with Klinger? I mean, we're not road people, so I mean, it would be, in my opinion, better for the
Well,
for
and
the
that was
city
my
to.
question. That was my question to Darren, is do you want to do the memo or do you, and I said in the email, would you like me to have Andy do it?
I mean,
So that was my original question.
okay. I mean,
I remember our thinking was council was gonna.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
And you've hired Klinger as the engineer of record.
Yeah, and I'm not speaking as a councilman, I'm speaking as somebody who used to be on the board, just sharing my recollection.
it ends up being we build it, but the city owns it and operates it and maintains it from then on.
So what you're approving here is just saying that you would pay reimbursed for the
Engineering.
Correct.
engineering.
Correct. Any other questions,
So
folks?
the city will maintain it, plow it, do whatever needs to be done? Is that right?
I mean, if we,
It's a city
if we
street.
accept it, yeah, when it's done. I don't know how it's gonna look like plowing it with it 800 feet jogging off like that. I don't know what that looks like for a snow plow, so, I
And
can't-
hopefully one day it'll be part of the larger.
right.
Legally, the concept was that this was going to be built as a city street, which is why it needed to be built to city specs. So therefore, it would be the same rule as any other city street as far as the city's obligations to plow and maintain, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same as any other city street, even though it's, the primary purpose now, maybe forever, hopefully not, but may always just be to serve the substation. But still, it would be a platted city street. It's an extension of Lakeside Drive.
Okay, so the extension that Matt was just talking about, say it went across what looks like a dam or is extended, then that becomes a city street obligation and not the Board of Public Works.
Correct.
I don't know what point the city would accept it. I don't know if they would accept it at 800 feet, or if they would say, okay, there needs to be a little bit more street before we accept it. I'm not sure.
Seems to be a mix there. We need to be,
Yeah, we need a buy-in on that.
we need to be sure.
But
I mean, it'll be to our standards. I just don't know.
I think everybody's kind of mixing stuff up here.
Playing
It's
with it,
and I just don't want us to get crossways over something that I think really ought to be a non-issue. This is not a situation where the board is acting as a developer, et cetera, because that's not what's going on. This is, the board has the right to build, as was stated by Darren, a gravel road in there. Somebody said a gravel road. Maybe it wasn't Darren said something about a gravel road. But the board could put a gravel road in there, but the concept was, let's work this as a partnership. This is an excellent opportunity for us to get this grant money. We'll get a city street built to specs to that distance, blah, blah, blah. I think, I don't mean to throw this out or pick a fight in a public meeting. I think it'd be a bad idea to take a position of, we're going to have to examine and blah, blah, blah. If we're having it built to our specs,
Right.
it's a city street.
We're gonna have to do it, yes. It would be a city street. My thing is, I don't know that we can guarantee that a snowplow, that will be the first place that we go, the first snow.
Oh, no, nobody's asking that.
Okay, all right.
It's just who's maintaining it long term.
Yes,
if-
that would
if it's
definitely,
accepted as a
that would
street.
be the city.
Any other questions? Do we have, I'm assuming we've got to have a vote on this.
Yes,
That's what you're requesting,
that's
correct?
my request of you, yes.
So do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to cover the engineering and the other from the electric fund.
Do we need to vote on both the engineering and the 200,000? No, okay.
No, not.
Just the engineering study at this point.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. There you go, you got your engineering study.
Thank you very much. The next item, we're moving on to stormwater.
Yes, we are.
We have had.
You're in the hot chair.
All right, I'm in the hot chair. Here we go. The board, you have before you the minutes from a meeting that we had with the executive team on November 1st, which was soon after the city council meeting in which they gave the direction that the BPW, we would be holding an election for a stormwater fee or tax or whatever we come up with that we could move forward. And so we kind of had a brainstorming meeting. And what you have is those minutes from that. And I am going to bore you, and I'm going to kind of go through them a little bit and explain what we've talked about and said. But what we're asking is for your input. Again, are we going off the wrong way? And James, you really get to listen to this and tell us we're going off the wrong way, and if it's going to be illegal or going to get any issues. So the goal that we have is to create a plan for the 2022 November election. The best funding mechanism. We really thought heavily about Mr. Ortworth's suggestion that he gave to the city council. The use of the county's acreage information and contracting with the county to annually collect the assessed tax or fee that we will ultimately provide. Now, we don't have that. We have not gone to the work of, getting it down to the nitty-gritty. It was going to take a lot of work to get there. Why? The ease and cost of the implementation. Using our own NISC and previously considered impervious coverage design was far too labor intensive, difficult for the community and the public to understand, and also too untimely. It would take us approximately 12 to 18 months to implement that into our own system and to manage it from that point on and to utilize. This would also require the duplication of activities that are already completed by the county, such as the parcel ownership and penalties process that they already have in place. Fairness. The acreage method with a tiered methodology is the best method to date. Discussion of the application for tax exempt entities was discussed. Legal direction and advice are needed on the subject. If these entities are not paying, it removes a large number of acres from the total number of acres within the city. Whether the city would be assessed was discussed. And so that kind of comes back to some of our larger customers, such as General Mills, who is actually, that property, I believe, legally is owned by the city. Therefore, how does that play into it all? And going back to James, are those non-for-profits that are non-taxed entities, are they absolutely out of the mix and not, and because of that, does a tax not work there? So those are questions that we'd really like to have answered.
I did not know the city owned General Mills property.
I was gonna say, only what they rent, right, okay.
There's one building, but then the other.
The annex down here is owned by the city.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Chapter
what,
1, the other properties owned during the Chapter 100
Okay.
term, so.
Yeah,
after the Chapter
yeah.
100 bonds are done, it reverts back.
Do you have any idea when?
I don't off the top of my head.
Okay.
We just signed that 2 years ago. They got a long way to go, right, when they did the expansion?
Yeah, it's probably 3 or 4 years ago.
2
now, but
years,
it's got
3
a
years
ways.
ago, maybe? Time
Didn't-
flies
didn't
when you're
George
having
do
fun.
that?
It hasn't been very long, though.
At least almost 3 years ago.
So that question of how that all plays is a bigger question that we've got to get to the bottom of.
If you're doing it on a property tax, I think it's pretty clear, and I haven't done any research. I hadn't talked to you guys about it, but my general from the hip opinion would be that not-for-profit, non-taxable entities like churches are not going to be taxable if you're doing it as a property tax. I'd also think that you also can't tax the sovereign, which means if you got anything that's owned by the state of Missouri, you got anything that's owned by the city of Hannibal, those things are also going to be non-taxable. So I realize probably about the only thing the state's got, other than the roadways, is going to be the visitor center up on top of the hill, but that would probably be non-taxable. And the highway department building, obviously, I didn't think about that one, but those are going to be non-taxable also under that type of a situation.
College.
The college probably is non-taxable. That was a little hazier, but they are probably non-taxable, and probably all the churches are non-taxable. The impervious surface method had been looking at it as a Hancock fee rather than as a tax, and I think this wasn't my legal opinion, but I think it had been the legal opinion of the law firm they had consulted out of Jeff City that those entities would be required to pay that. But without doing some specific research to find otherwise, I'm going to say that any government entities and any church type non-taxable entities are not going to be covered under this tax.
Including schools.
Schools would count. Yeah,
So all of that makes it into a very foggy, and frankly, that's when you take in you're pushing much more cost to your citizens, which makes it very painful for the citizens, and they think, pass. So those are the things that we've got to look at. How do you make it fair? And is there a way of doing it through the county that makes it fair? So, and we don't have to have those answers today. We're not gonna. Effectiveness. We recognize the need to cover three distinct costs. Number one, the existing loan from the electric fund to the stormwater fund. Number two, the state and federal requirements for MS4 regulations. And then third, the existing stormwater utility operations, maintenance, and capital improvement needs. A previous Black and Veatch estimates were respectively 1.7 million one-time cost for the loan, 140,000 annual cost for the MS4 maintenance, and then approximately 2.8 million annual cost for the capital improvements. These numbers are to be refreshed with the most up-to-date information we have. It will still be an estimate until we have an accurate third-party study completed. So all of this is still going to be, which makes it difficult, is it's going to be foggy for a long time till we really nail it down and know exactly where we're headed.
Maybe July. Will we make that kind of deadline?
All right, Matt, I'm going to throw you right under the bus. You hear that? How long is that? If we get that,
Well, when you're hiring a consultant too.
if you get this, if we get something passed, the first thing we're going to do is we've got to have a study done, because we still don't know today exactly where our priorities are, because we can't spend any money to go out and chase it down. We're going to have to clean out the system to look at it. Just cleaning it, if every one of those pipes is a third or a 25% full of crap, and I think that's a pretty generous estimate, that's going to take us some time just to clean it out so that they can inspect it. And then you're going to have an engineering firm that's going to inspect it and assess it, and so it's going to take some time. What is your estimate? 1.5 million?
1.5 million to do a hydraulic model of the system and to do assessment and also help with the ownership issues. Look where easements are, where we don't have easements, where it's in right of way, where it's not, that type of thing.
So we're not looking for that before a November vote, or?
And I don't think we can. I mean, we talked to today. We talked with our. She's not our bond counsel.
Financial advisor.
She's our financial advisor that helps us set up the bonds. And she said if we do that again, we are jeopardizing our bonding. Not to mention we've already had our attorney that has said if we do that anymore, we're really stepping out of it. Is that an appropriate interpretation?
I'm turned off. No, I was on, and now I turned it off. I am concerned that while there is no hard and fast rule regarding how much you can borrow from one fund and loan to another fund, at some point you run the risk that if a taxpayer lawsuit is filed, that a court would find that you didn't have any reasonable intention to repay the money, and that you were in fact just taking the money from one fund to another, and then they could come down on you with both feet. So I don't think you've necessarily overstated what I said to you, but anytime you ask an attorney a question, I always love to hear myself talk, so I had to clarify.
Thank you. But our finance, and so with this warning, I will take that as a very significant warning. And then another warning, which I would say is even more significant if we're going to take and have any kind of jeopardization of future bonding, that I think we need to not plan on doing anything prior to that funding source being assessed, which says we're not doing that study until that vote is passed. And then we're going to then we can get going full gun and go.
I can't speak for all four of us, but I'm pretty sure that's a good idea.
Yeah, we're not, thank you. D, passable. Whatever we decide upon, there must be a filter on our offering as to what the citizens will pass into law. We discussed two types of citizen advisory groups. One group would be to provide feedback on the passability of the funding mechanism that the HBPW creates. This could be in the form of surveys to the entire citizenry or a smaller representative sample size or both. The second citizens group would be a group that is supported by information that is motivated to help pass the vote. However, how this is employed must be vetted through legal so as not to get sideways with any of the ethics issues of that effort. Timely. The city has instructed the HBPW to be prepared for the November 2022 election, as the city is going for a tax increase at the April 2022 election. The substance and outcome of the city April election will have a significant impact on the best way for the HBPW to proceed with the November election. Our education outreach must be wisely deployed with special attention given to the April election. So this, we can do all of this, the designing and et cetera, but I think we need to be kind of wise how we approach this. We don't want to start double dipping and harm the city's efforts in any way, shape, or form. So we've got to just be wise on how we do that and take your advice and direction. And also the outreach for those other groups will be very valuable. Timing, a city April tax effort, we will support them in any effort that they need from us. The other thing that we've thought of is depending how that April election goes, and this may not be popular, but maybe with the electioneering, those that are smarter than me, maybe doing it in April of the next year is a better bet than doing it in the November of 2022. That's something that we need to consider. So timing is definitely something we need to consider and be careful of.
And just to clarify on that, whether we got approved in November or we get approved in April of the following year, we're not going to see any of that money if we do, in fact, go the county collection route. We're not going to see any of that money until January of 24 anyway. Because you provide the information to the counties in August, and then they send out the property tax bill 1st of November. So, and they don't, your first check is going to be January of 24.
Either way. And so, again, looking at it so far as it being a passable vote offering, we make a wise decision there. And those of you that have run for office have a better feeling for it than we do.
I'm thinking those of you who studied Prop S and W and how it got passed might be the better option to go on the April ballot.
That's what some of our best minds thought, the very same thing. So you're right. Actions, RFP study. So we know that first thing that we're going to do is we've got to get that study done. The very first action we need to do when we receive any funding is a comprehensive stormwater assessment. We will work to have an RFP for that study in hand so that we can begin work as soon as possible. But we will not put it out the door until we have that vote of a yes. PR campaign, we are confident in our in-house staff to meet this need. Timing to be determined. City election and community input will craft timing. Message, we need funding and support. City election and community input will craft the method and message. So again, and I should put in there legal. we're gonna rely heavily on legal keeping us in between the rails and that we don't have any problems that way. Capital plan, a rough estimate based on our limited knowledge of what is needed is currently an estimate. An essential piece to the question is how much of the stormwater system is the responsibility of the city, BPW. Much of the stormwater system is on private property without an easement or designated right-of-way. And so one of the first things we are going to do currently is we are still doing the GIS work on mapping of the area, and we're getting property lines in with our existing stormwater system to the very best of our knowledge. So we're not going out and doing anything extra, we're getting that done. And then we're gonna come in, Matt and I are gonna sit down with Lisa and her team, and we're gonna say, all right, here's how much stormwater we have, here's how much is under private property. How do we want to handle this? And James, you're going to be in the room there too, because that question of those folk, there's many people out there that when land was cheap, they bought it because there was a creek through it. They built a stormwater line through it. Then they built their house on top of it. Is that ours? And yes, you've got stuff ahead of the stream that comes from other neighbors that are from our system and other system. And all of those questions, and we need to have, before we even begin this, we need to have a very solid and set, firm policy of what's going to happen there. And we've got to have the city agree with that, or else we're going to run into a lot of problems. And we've got to have that nailed down, and then we can start the work. And that will also have a huge effect on how much this is going to cost us.
Thank you.
It
That's going
will.
to have a huge effect on what the amount of funds you need to even make one repair, much less the hundreds that we have. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep, it could
Yeah,
cut it.
that's a huge question.
It could cut it in half. It'll have an effect. And so we've got to know those answers before we start. And so that's work that I don't think is beyond what we can do previously. I'm looking for a head nod, yes.
Yeah, basically my thought is this. We probably should not be working on anything where we don't have a right-of-way or easement. And we should probably take the position that absent some substantial proof that in fact we built it and that we established a right-of-way by consent and by allowing our use, that we believe that to be a private sewer, and we're not touching your sewer until such time as we have an easement or right-of-way for said sewer. And that also then gives you the ability to, if you're going to take something, set requirements and decide what you're going to do. Perhaps you're willing to accept everything. Perhaps you're not willing to accept things unless this, and this happen. And, it would put you in the position where you've got some control. And because as things stand right now, regardless of whether other water dumps into a sewer that then runs across their property, I think it's pretty clear that without a right-of-way or easement, there's always going to be a potential argument that that's not a public right-of-way or sewer, and it would be very, very foolish for us to put money into it or do things on it without that type of an establishment. And I think that most people are going to be willing to voluntarily convey that, but if they're not, they're on their own.
So I recognize this is shooting from the hip right now, but that's
Sure.
where we're headed, and we're gonna,
We're shooting from the hip, but here's the thing: when we get into land issues, right-of-way issues, easement issues, that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years of my practice. That's what I started doing, and so you're going to get a much more solid answer from me on those issues, shooting from the hip, because I have litigated both for private entities and for cities these types of runoff and right-of-way issues. I've been doing it for so long. I was still doing it back when Missouri was under common enemy doctrine before we went to reasonable use. So that just says I'm getting old, I guess. But,
excellent, we got the right guy.
Yeah. MoDOT has lots of procedures on that, I'm sure. That's their standard practice there on how to deal with right-of-way and drainage issues.
Sure.
And we can cut and paste that pretty quickly, I think.
Board involvement? we do want your input, and that's what we're gonna ask you about, just talking about today. I present it to you here, but we'll also have it on the agenda for the November, so we can have more input if for what you have. As far as voter support, the topic of sunsetting of the fee/tax was discussed. 5, 7, or 10-year sunset of the funding source may make it more likely to pass. And so those are all the things that we kind of discussed. We'd like you to, what are your thoughts, direction? Again, we will have it on the next board meeting. We may have it more than, and make it a regular item. However, that's kind of where we're leaning. What are your thoughts?
I see you have several action items here that all look good. I agree with the legal side of this thing. We don't want to step on our toes and have a bill or have a vote that doesn't pass, but yet we still get in trouble. So we want to make sure that we're doing that very carefully. I tend to agree with the April timeline as well.
Okay.
The more time we've got to work on this, I think the better. I've never been a huge fan of sunsets, but I do see the logic behind it. I don't think 5 years is long enough for the initial start, though. I would like to see it be a little longer than that. We'll just be getting started in 5 years, and
We'll have about 2.5 years of
yeah,
projects in and done by the time we do that. I'm afraid. I hate to be a pessimist on it like that, but I
I think
agree.
you're shooting yourself in the foot with the sunset on this. This isn't going away. We haven't had a sales tax increase since 1973 or anything added on to besides assessed value. This is never going to end. This is something that they're not going to see results of immediately or even 15 years down the road when we've spent $20 million and they're still going to go, what'd you spend it on? We're going to know that, but they're never going to see that. I think you're opening yourself up to having it shut down as quick as you get it started. The sunset, as far as on the sales tax increase for the city, I think is a wonderful idea. Sunset on storm water, I think you better just get it passed and have it pay it, because generations are going to be paying that. My grandchildren, probably my great-grandchildren, are going to be paying for this in this community. So I feel like if you offer them a sunset, you're setting yourself up for failure, because knowing Hannibal the way I do, they'll vote it out in 5 years, and there you are. So I would probably err against a sunset on the stormwater funding.
Excellent.
are there others that feel similar?
Yeah, similar. I think we can deliberate a little bit more at our next board meeting, but I concur with Melissa that it's been a 50 years of deferred maintenance. You just can't solve that problem in 5 years. You can start, you can do a lot of planning and implement, but we'll flesh it
If the
out.
funding goes away in 5 years, you just did a lot of planning for nothing.
Yeah, and like I said, you just don't know with voting. You don't know where the voters, you don't know where we're going to be in 5 years. So if we are fortunate enough to get it passed, I think we better ride that out as far as we can.
I don't know of any voters that made a decision based on whether anything was or was not sunset. And if you query 90% of the people that go to the ballot booth, I don't think you're going to find a lot of John Q. public that even bothers to understand what that means. And in some ways, even with the sales tax, you propose a sunset, I think that means that you kind of don't 100% believe in it yourself. So if I had to say in the wording of the sales tax thing, I would not even bring it up. And I would absolutely not bring it up with any fees we're talking about here.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, it looks to me like we're moving in the right direction. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments about the plan. Mine were basically the legal part is the only thing that really concerns me. I don't want us to get something passed and then have a $2 million lawsuit 6 months later.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So please chew on it, and we will bring this up again.
Absolutely will.
That's all I have.
Anything else, anybody? Any other comments from the audience?
We're gonna get it done, so don't say if, hopefully.
Yeah.
There you go.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, everybody, for coming.